What ensues when one of comedy's greatest legends settles in for what's intended to be an enjoyable, upbeat late-night chat is himself ambushed by a host more intent on argument than dialogue. What starts out as a standard Hollywood interview takes a quick detour, opening up old sores and shredding years of professional admiration. The atmosphere in the studio shifts in a heartbeat. You can practically sense the air chill as the smiles drop and the tension builds. And when it is all said and done, one of these comedy legends exits the stage, leaving the crowd agog and speechless, wondering what in the world they just saw. But before we break down all that went down, go ahead and subscribe, and let us know in the comments which late-night host you believe gets the toughest guests the best. You're going to want to discuss this one. It was just another night on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. It was all going according to plan. The audience was hyped, abuzz with anticipation, waiting for the evening's top guest, none other than Eddie Murphy. The comedy icon was in the midst of promoting his new endeavor, and fans were looking forward to the typical combination of laughter, war stories, and all-around positivity. Murphy had been going around the block all week, entertaining crowds with stories from his legendary career. Everything from his early days on Saturday Night Live to the blockbuster movies that established him as a star. No big deal. The familiar theme music kicked in, Colbert made his witty monologue, and the show went on as smoothly as clockwork. Then Eddie strode on stage, and something was wrong. Yes, the crowd applauded and cheered as always, and Colbert cracked his trademark smile. But beneath it all, there was a detectable tension even viewers at home could likely feel. Eddie's smile seemed a trifle too stage-manicured, a trifle too forced, and Colbert's greeting, affable, of course, on the surface, but there was an edge to it, like the hint of something just bubbling beneath. "Eddie Murphy, folks," Colbert began as Eddie sat down. "Welcome. You know, I have to say, observing your career all these years has been one wild ride. From your uncensored stand-up to those G-rated flicks. It's been quite a transformation, hasn't it?" Now, it wasn't necessarily what he said, but the way he said it. That word, evolution, spoke like it was in quotation marks, like it was less a compliment and more of a deliberate reminder of how far Eddie had evolved. Perhaps too far. Eddie caught on immediately. His trained smile faltered for a moment before he responded. "Well, Stephen, I think any artist is going to evolve and change as time goes by. It's what keeps it interesting. I've just tried to relate to people, whether that's with the more edgy material or something more family-oriented." Right, Colbert nodded, but his tone had a little bite, like he wasn't completely buying. He leaned in ever so slightly. "But others would say that this so-called growth, this evolution, it's really more about playing it safe. I mean, when was the last time you actually took a risk with your comedy? When did you last push the envelope the way you used to?" The audience fell silent abruptly. This wasn't the sort of saucy banter people associate with late-night television. This was closer to the bone, more intimate, and you could tell it was obvious this interview had just turned a corner. This was no longer light banter, it was getting more like an interrogation. Eddie's demeanor tensed up, and you could practically see him tightening his muscles. "I risk all the time," Murphy told him, his tone firm but edged with something more piercing than humor. "Perhaps they are merely different risks than those I took at 25. Colbert reclined, a smile flirting with his lips. "Maturation alters what you believe is worth risking." "Maturity?" Eddie repeated, squinting. "You're calling it that? Because from where I'm sitting, you've spent the past 2 decades trying to get away from the thing that made you a star. Raw honesty, the willingness to offend, the balls to say what most comedians wouldn't." You could almost feel the studio hold its breath as Eddie's jaw tightened. "I'm not sure what you're accusing me of, Stephen, but this sanitized Eddie Murphy you've been selling for years." "Sanitized?" Colbert retorted. "Is that what we call it now? You were bold back in your day, picking anything, no matter how controversial. Now, we get muley mouth and fat suits. It's like watching a declawed lion." That one landed. Eddie leaned forward, his usual polished calm beginning to crack. "You might have the wrong idea about courage and comedy," he said, voice low. It's easy to lob barbs from behind a desk about someone else's career. But I'm the one on stage. My name's on the marquee. I'm the one creating opportunities for myself and others. Sometimes the bravest move is knowing when to evolve. Evolve, Colbert repeated, eyes narrowing. There it is again. Evolution means getting better, moving forward. What you've done feels more like regression. You've gone from groundbreaking to, well, safe, predictable, commercial. Commercial? Eddie's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. For a heartbeat, it looked like he might storm off right then. Instead, he drew a breath and fired right back. You want to talk commercial? Let's talk about the show. The desk, the format. It's been the same thing for 60 years. Where's your evolution? Your risk-taking? You're doing a smug riff on Johnny Carson. At least Carson had the decency to be charming. A gasp of shock ran through the crowd. Colbert's smile disappeared, replaced by a look of icy intensity that could melt ice. Rich, said Colbert, gritting his teeth. Coming from someone who has made the same film 15 times in different costumes. At least my program makes people laugh. Murphy leaned forward, voice modulated but intense. Your program? For the most part, it makes others feel superior to whoever you are targeting for ridicule. There is a universe of difference between humor and condescension, though I can imagine you confusing the two. By now, the studio was electric with tension. Forced giggles, sudden gasps. It was difficult to say who was what. Backstage, producers were most likely frantically trying to come up with a way to salvage what was to be another run-of-the-mill celeb cameo. Stephen Colbert's eyes locked into a glare. He leaned in, prepared to deliver another stinging remark. You know what, Eddie? He started, the room holding its breath. I suspect what's really upsetting you, Colbert said, leaning in with a keen gaze, is that someone's finally speaking aloud what people around this business have said for years, that along the way, Eddie Murphy, the former comedy royalty, opted to become comedy's court jester. That was crossing the line. Eddie's anger flashed. And I think what really irks you, Stephen, Eddie answered, his tone level but cutting, is that no matter how many Ivy League diplomas you accumulate or how clever your jokes read, you'll never approach the effect that I had when I was 25 years old. You can take cover behind your writers, your research staff, and that teleprompter all you need to. But at the end of the day, you're just another talk show host in a long line of talk show hosts. I'm Eddie Murphy. He said his name with full confidence, no hesitation, and absolutely no apology. That confidence seemed to hit a nerve. You were Eddie Murphy, Colbert shot back coldly. Now you're just someone clinging to old glory, too proud to admit your best work is long behind you. And that was the line that snapped it. Eddie stood up, not suddenly, but with a slow, measured movement. The studio fell completely silent. You'd have heard a pin drop. Cameras continued rolling, filming the moment in all its unedited awkwardness. Viewers at home likely sat statuesque. This was not only a tense exchange, it was a TV moment of no precedent. Murphy just stood there for a beat, looming over Colbert's desk. It looked like he was going to walk away. Honestly, most people wouldn't have faulted him, but what he did instead was even more potent. He sat down again, but this time he hunched forward. No more respectful stance. Elbows on knees, eyes fixed on Colbert with a soft but intense energy that made everyone squirm in their seats. You know what, Stephen? Eddie said softly. I was going to let that one slide. But since you mentioned it, maybe it's time for real talk. His tone was calm, but every word felt like a sledge. You want to discuss my good days being over? Okay, let's discuss what those days actually were. He paused, allowing the silence to fall, then proceeded with quiet insistence. Let's discuss a kid from Roosevelt, Long Island, age 20, who walked onto the Saturday Night Live set and revolutionized comedy permanently. Let's discuss a child who produced characters that people are still quoting today. 40 years later, Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood, Buckwheat, the Mr. Rogers parodies that even tickled Fred Rogers' funny bone. Colbert began to interrupt, but Eddie waved a hand and continued, his voice rising stronger, more rooted in fact with every sentence. Discuss Raw and Delirious, two stand-up specials that didn't just push the envelope. They rewrote the rules, not just for black comedians, Not just for edgy comics, for all of comedy. I didn't push boundaries, Stephen. I blew them up and then drew a whole new map. He stopped once more, but not for permission. And you wish to discuss risk and courage with me? He shook his head slowly. You have no idea. There were other times, Colbert grunted, attempting to tug things back on track. But his voice, this time, carried little authority behind it. Colbert tried to push back, but his voice didn't carry the same weight as before. What worked then wouldn't work now, he said. The world's changed. Society has evolved. Murphy let out a dry laugh, but there was no humor in it. Society hasn't evolved, he said. It's gotten scared. Comedy hasn't grown braver. It's gotten timid. In shows like yours, you're part of the reason why. He waved his arm at the studio, then moved in. Clear, not bellowing, but slamming every word with soft conviction. You sit behind this desk every evening, throwing out platonic jabs at soft targets. You sermonize to an audience that already agrees with you. Where's the danger in that? Where's the risk in mocking politicians your audience already despises? The room was quiet. The audience, the cast, everyone was riveted. But Eddie wasn't done. You want to know why I did those family films? He said, his tone level. Because I had something to prove, something you'll never get. I had to prove that a black New York comedian could star in a $100 million picture. I had to demonstrate that I could get white kids in suburban theaters to laugh just as loudly as black kids in the city. I needed a way to prove I was more than the angry black guy white people were fine laughing at, so long as I was on a stage, neat and contained. Colbert's face reddened. So what? You're saying your artistic choices were all about race? No, Eddie replied without missing a beat. I'm saying they were about reality, something you've never had to wrestle with. Did you think I wanted to wear fat suits to portray 5 characters in one film? Did you think that was my artistic vision? He shook his head. That was me demonstrating that I was capable of disappearing so far into a character that people forgot they were seeing Eddie Murphy. That was me establishing I had range, something more than most comedians could even conceive. But at what expense? Colbert prodded, not willing to let up. You transitioned from this raw, forceful voice to something planned out. You became an entertainer rather than an artist. Eddie laughed again, this time with a harsh, bitter tinge. You want to discuss genuine? What's genuine about you, Stephen? What's genuine about this? He gestured to the cameras, the desk, the whole late-night apparatus. You're playing a role too. You're the concerned interviewer, the serious thinker, the guy who's just posing the tough questions. But both of us know what this is really all about. You're not seeking truth. You're attempting to dismantle someone you view as part of the old guard, so you can feel more relevant. That's ridiculous, Colbert grunted, but even he didn't sound like he believed it. Is it? Murphy asked, tilting his head. Because from where I'm sitting, what I see is that your entire thing is predicated on being the smartest man in the room. The man who tells everyone else why they're wrong. And sure, maybe that works when you've got authors or politicians in that chair, but I've done this longer than you've been out of college, and I can smell insecurity from a mile away. The cameras picked up everything, every flutter, every hesitation, every shift in attitude, high-definition soap opera in the making. You can only guess what was happening in the control room. The producers were sweating bullets, no doubt, but nobody was halting it. Nobody could. Colbert straightened up, his voice lowered, and a chill crept into it. Know something, Eddie? He snapped, his voice growing hostile. You can't cope with the fact that comedy has moved on without you, that your approach, the shock, the offensiveness, the crass punchlines, that's not what people want anymore. Colbert attempted to defend himself. They want something more intelligent, more advanced, more socially aware. More socially aware? Eddie repeated, his voice rising, not in loudness, but passion. You mean sanitized? He breathed in, calm but intense. More refined, more censored, more blessed by counsels of individuals who've never made anyone laugh in their lives. You call your comedy sophisticated? Eddie shook his head. Your comedy is designed for people who are too scared to laugh too hard, just in case someone judges them for it. Colbert sat up straighter, looking defensive now. Well, at least my comedy doesn't rely on outdated stereotypes or offensive caricatures. That was another step too far. Eddie stood again. Only this time, he didn't return to his seat. He circled the desk, slowly, deliberately, until he stood only a few feet from Colbert. The host tensed visibly. Outdated stereotypes? Eddie's tone fell to a soft, icy calm. You want to discuss stereotypes, Stephen? Let's talk about your stereotype? He inched forward slightly. How about the condescending white liberal stereotype who believes he knows best for all of us? Or the man who had every advantage, attended the finest schools, and now gives sermons to people like me? People who actually came from somewhere. I never said I was anything other than what I am, Colbert said, his tone tense. But the swagger was missing. No, Murphy replied, her eyes locked on him. But you'd think where you're from would give you the high moral ground. Like your opinion is better, more enlightened, more evolved. He took a step back, allowing Colbert room to breathe. But here's what you obviously don't get about evolution, Stephen, Eddie went on, making his way slowly back to the other side of the stage. Actual evolution isn't about becoming what other people want you to become. It's about being who you were supposed to be, despite what everybody else believes. Eddie halted behind his chair and planted his hands firmly on the back of it. Stable, solid, unmoving. I developed from a kid with nothing, he stated calmly, into a man who's created jobs, opened doors, and provided opportunities for people they would have never had without me. I developed from being told that I'd never be more than a gimmick to showing that comedy isn't necessarily about race or boundaries or approval. Comedy doesn't have to remain in a box unless you place it there. He gazed directly at Colbert once more. And you developed from one with potential into one who uses that platform to destroy the very people who made your platform possible. That's not what this is about, Colbert said hastily. But the statement sounded weak, defensive. So what's it about, Stephen? Eddie demanded, his tone low but steady. Because from where I'm standing, it appears that you're attempting to pick at another man's legacy just to feel good about your own. Like you know in your heart of hearts that you'll never be remembered the way that I will. So you're attempting to rewrite history, to make mine seem lesser. The whole room was holding its breath. There was tension in the air. Colbert's knuckles were white as he grasped the edge of his desk, and Eddie, still placid but obviously restraining himself, looked as though he might at any moment let fly with something that would explode everything wide open. Then something changed. Colbert snapped. Something in Eddie's final words had obviously hit a nerve. Whatever had been keeping Colbert together, the suave calm, the intellectual detachment, snapped. This wasn't about ratings, reputation, or even humor anymore. This isn't about ego, Eddie, Colbert replied, his anger boiling over into a shake. This is about accountability. His tone turned cutting. This is about someone finally standing up and telling you what no one else will say to your face. That your comedy offended people. That it perpetuated harmful stereotypes. That it undid progress for decades. And that while you ascended to fame, you did so on the shoulders of communities that didn't have a platform to strike back. Murphy's face grew dark. His eyes narrowed, cold steel. Don't you dare, he spoke slowly, try to spin this into some great crusade. Don't you dare pretend you're talking for anyone but yourself. He stepped closer, his words rising just high enough to contain the gravity of what he was saying. It's the things that really hurt people, Stephen. Poverty, opportunity deprivation, being told you weren't smart enough, good enough, acceptable enough. That hurt people. Comedy provided them a reason to laugh despite the pain. It provided people like me a voice. Convenient excuse, snapped Colbert. It allows you to avoid any accountability. You hide behind the notion of comedy being harmless, like it exists in a bubble, apart from the actual world. But it doesn't. What you release has repercussions. Eddie strided back toward the desk, keeping pace with Colbert's growing agitation, step for step. You want to speak of consequences? He replied, now clearly heated up. The consequence of my comedy? It opened doors for other comedians who appeared like me. It demonstrated that black performers could head Hollywood, that we could top movies, fill out arenas, bear entire franchises. It broke walls down. Colbert refused to back down. He leaned in, his eyes narrowed. And what about the rest of the fallout? He snapped, voice acerbic. What about the children who drank in those stereotypes? The communities who were belittled, turned into punchlines? What about them? That's when it happened. Murphy bunched his fist and smacked it onto Colbert's desk, hard. The sound of it cracked out across the studio, and everyone reacted. The crew, the audience. Even Colbert winced. "Don't you dare talk to me about my own people," Eddie replied, his voice cold as ice, but crushing in its impact. "Don't you dare attempt to instruct me on what my work was to the people? Who lived the lives I was discussing? People who sound like me. Who grew up where I grew up? You think your critique, your viewpoint, is more significant than my lived reality?" The crowd did not breathe, not even a cough. This was not late-night television anymore. This was raw, personal, painfully real. "I'm not faking it," Colbert said back, but his tone was softer now, defendant. "All I'm telling you is that intent does not cancel out impact. Even if you didn't intend to hurt someone, some of your material did. And that impact, it counts." Murphy stared at him, incredulity in his face. "Intent is less important than effect?" He repeated, the words venomous. "This is the type of thinking that's murdering comedy, Stephen. This is the type of reasoning that dictates we judge art solely on the basis of discomfort it causes in retrospect, not upon what it was attempting to communicate in its own era. Measuring humor by how the most easily offended person in the room will receive it," Murphy went on, shaking his head. "That's how you get comedy so watered down, so fearful of offending anyone, that it doesn't actually resonate with anyone. Perhaps that is still preferable," Colbert retorted, "to comedy that resonates by punching down." "Punching down?" Murphy brusqued. His tone rose like the crash of a wave, harsh, abrupt, angry. "I was punching up, Stephen." His intensity filled the studio. "I was a poor kid from Long Island mocking the ridiculous world that didn't include me, a world that did not want me to be a part of it. I was describing my life, my people, my struggles. That's not punching down. That's survival. You want to talk about punching down? You're sitting there using your platform to completely dismantle someone's body of work, using criteria that did not even exist at the time when that work was created." Colbert got up too now, no longer behind the protection of his desk. "Those standards existed, Eddie," he insisted. "Some of us simply had the guts to live by them, even when it wasn't popular or profitable." Murphy laughed, but it was a cold sound, brittle with fury. "You call that courage? Being safe? Playing by the rules dictated by committees and tweet mobs? Courage is being on stage with just a microphone and your truth, knowing perfectly well half the audience is going to get up and leave, but saying it anyway. That's what I did." Colbert folded his arms. "Your truth," he sneered, a mocking tone to his voice. "What if your truth injured someone else's truth? What if your victory was achieved by silencing voices that didn't even have a platform yet?" "Then perhaps," Murphy said, eyes fixed on Colbert, "those voices should have constructed their own platform rather than waiting for invitation." He didn't yell. He didn't have to. "Because I never waited for anybody to give me anything. Nobody ever said, 'Here you go, Eddie. Take this career. You've earned it.' I struggled with every joke, every film, every audience. I earned that spotlight. And now, because my journey doesn't fit your idea of responsible, you want to pretend like it doesn't count?" Colbert's response came quickly, his tone biting. "I want to be able to hold it responsible, because success without accountability, that's just selfishness." Murphy looked at him for a long moment, and then, in a voice much softer, but no less intense, he added, "You know what, Stephen? I've been in this business 40 years. I've met critics. I've met execs who didn't like me, people who thought I didn't belong, but I've never met anyone quite like you." He glared, eyes tight with repressed anger. "I've never met anyone so eager to take someone else's entire life and legacy and make it their own personal soapbox." "This has nothing to do with me," Colbert answered, a bit too quickly, a bit too high. Everything is always about you, Murphy barked. This entire interview, this entire show has been about you, your moral high ground, your need to be the smartest guy in the room. You didn't invite me here for an honest conversation. You invited me here to utilize me as a prop, a punchline in your never-ending act as comedy's moral compass. Murphy walked to the edge of the stage. For an instant, he seemed about to exit into the wings, but instead he faced around once more. You want to know the real difference between us, Stephen? He said, voice steady now, but cutting as ever. I made people laugh when they needed it. I gave them joy in the middle of hardship. I helped them feel seen, even when life made them feel invisible. He paused, then concluded with devastating clarity. People? You make people feel smarter than everybody else. You give them permission to look down at folks who don't think just like them. Murphy gazed out at the silent audience. That's not comedy, Stephen. That's not comedy, Eddie said calmly. That's just intellectual bullying with higher ratings. Colbert's face colored, half fury, half embarrassment. He sat tensely at his desk, attempting to recover control of an instant that had obviously gotten away from him. If you can't handle being questioned on your content, he snapped back, perhaps you shouldn't be giving interviews. Murphy shook his head slowly, as though even he couldn't quite believe what he was listening to. Challenged? He repeated. This wasn't a challenge, Stephen. This was an ambush. He spread his arms wide, his voice increasing in a blend of anger and disappointment. You took your bully pulpit and you used it not for dialogue, but for prosecution. You brought me here to place me on trial for success that you disapprove of, and I don't have to sit here and accept that. Without further ado, Murphy turned and headed toward the far end of the stage. The crowd didn't know what to do. Some leaned forward, others remained immobile, but Colbert couldn't let it alone. Walk away, Eddie, he shouted after him, bitterness edging into his voice. That's what you've been doing for years, walking away from anything that might actually challenge you to grow. Murphy halted. He didn't turn around, didn't yell, but when he spoke, the weight of his words hit the room like thunder. No, Stephen, he said quietly. What I've been doing is walking towards something. He paused, still facing away. Building something, creating something that's going to outlast both of us. Then he turned his head slightly, just enough for the cameras to catch his profile. You'll spend your career tearing down what other people built, he said. I spent mine constructing something that can't be knocked down, no matter how badly people like you might try. And with that, Eddie Murphy strode off stage, leaving Stephen Colbert sitting alone at his desk, with a stunned and silent crowd around him. No applause, no laughter. Just the sound of a still rolling camera. The camera lingered on Colbert's face for a few seconds longer. He looked, stunned, humbled, perhaps even a bit haunted. Then the screen went black, and the program was interrupted for commercials. What had been going to be a straightforward promotion interview had become something else entirely. A clash of worlds, of generations, of belief systems on what comedy is and who gets to make those calls. It wasn't just a viral moment. It was a line in the sand. And to judge from the reaction of the audience, only a single man left with his dignity still whole. So I ask you now, what did you make of that unforgettable showdown? Have you ever watched a late-night interview get this far out of hand? Undefined. Leave your comments below, especially the part that left you most speechless. And if you like to have deep dives into the seconds when Hollywood's shiny surface begins to split, don't forget to subscribe because we're just getting started.